Right. Hey, Ron and Clue. So, time to jump into the Super Slam set review. So, we'll be breaking it down into different categories of cards, starting off today with the generics, then the brute cards, guardian cards, revered, reviled, and finally the expansion slot. That way, hopefully the videos are a bit more condensed, a bit easier to watch. But, if you are a fan of long form content, we did go over the entire card pool, right? First impressions, broader thoughts, on the weekend, so I'll put the VOD for that in the description if that's more of your jam. But other than that, don't forget to like and subscribe, and apparently there's a new button as well if you're watching on mobile called Hyping. So, I don't know, see a button, click a button, easy enough, right? But let's start off with the generic card. So the big one, Authority of Ataya as the fabled gem of the set. So legendary, you can only have one in your deck, and when this is pitched, defense reaction cards cost your opponent an additional resource to play this turn. So, this, I think, is easy enough to accept, right? Especially just, again, glancing read as one of the strongest fables, but I would honestly say, in the current scope of Flesh and Blood and its design, this is the strongest fable we have, right? So even though you can get, a whole chunk of life to fatigue out of the Heart of Verendale, and, gold is great for gold-centered heroes, the reason Authority of Ataya is so strong is because it reduces the consistency of your opponent's deck, right? I think that's the easiest way to sum it up. So as you get more and more competitive in Flesh and Blood, right? While every turn is about getting the most value out of it, it's also about having the most consistent set of turns. And what the Authority of Ataya does is essentially take a whole subset of cards that are basically auto-includes into the vast majority of decks and make them worse, right? So Sink Below, zero cost defense reaction. You see it in, again, the majority of decks. And what the Authority of Ataya then does is make it a 2-card play. And the fact that it is now a 2-card play or requires a resource floating or your tunic charges or anything like that is bad, because then Sink Below is below rate, right? And then that just makes it a really, really bad option in your deck. Now, obviously, it's a fringe scenario. You have to find Authority as your opponent finds Sink Below or one of their other defense reactions. But that's enough, right? Because again, it's about consistency of the deck. So this just being a possibility, right? Something that you can throw out, again, makes Sink Below a little bit worse, makes defense reactions a little bit worse, and a little bit worse when, again, everything is tightly refined and organized to be the best possible value deck, makes it super strong. Authority of Ataya is a very, very crazy fable, and it can be a little bit worrisome, right? Because it is a fable, it is an extremely playable fable, but I think what we're also seeing in the past few sets, and especially Super Slam, is the emphasis on blocks and the reduction of defense reactions, which is a weird thing to say, because the Hunted, right, 2 sets ago, gave us Shelter from the Storm. But I think that is the correct direction of the game as well to go. So this being a sort of floodgate, right, to defense reactions, I think is absolutely fine. So yeah, it is a very strong fable. It will see a vast amount of play at a high level of competitiveness, but it's not necessarily something you need, right? So I think that's the main issue with fables. They feel when they get this good as something you need, but again, it's about increasing that low end of your opponent's deck, right? Reducing their consistency overall, right? Rather than just being a straight, you want to draw this as soon as possible, you want to play this as soon as possible, this is your thing to build around, etc. It's really good because, again, of how it impacts your opponent's deck more than how it impacts your deck, right? At least that's my understanding of the card. Now, for equipment, we have Helm of Hindsight, right, which is really nice compared to the other 3 generic pieces that we do get in Super Slam. So this is a 3-cost attack tutor, which is just really, really nice, right? Anytime we can tutor something from the graveyard back to the top of our deck, get it, get another set of use out of it, is something where you can definitely think about it as something that might actually work over something defensive, over something else functional, right? So Plume of Evergrowth for Verdance is the prime example there. Now, this is, a little bit more restricted. It has to be specifically attack action, but it is still something nice enough in the common slot that could potentially see certain play with certain combos. So, yeah, as a generic piece of equipment, it fills a lot of gaps that we see, and because of its overall effect, I would say it's one of the better generics that we have, right? In comparison, we have the rest of the pieces. So we have Garland of Spring, which is basically just a reskin Blossom of Spring. Then we have Punching Gloves, which are a mix between Crackerjacks and Fisticuffs, right? They hit the next power point over Crackerjacks, but you have to pay 2. And then, unlike Fisticuffs, you have to pre-pump rather than as an attack reaction. So they're interesting, but I wouldn't say they're necessarily great. There's a lot of other specific ways to get, a +2 that are probably better than this, depending on the deck that you're actually running. And then we have the legs, which are, again, another basic reskin of Ironhide, right? So Ironhide featuring from Monarch, and again, it's the same thing, just better worded, I suppose, utilizing the actual keyword rather than how Ironhide is phrased, but they do exactly the same thing. You pay 1, it gets +2, and when the chain link closes, they get destroyed, right? Toby Jugs through Blade Break, Ironhide through its effect. So yeah, 3 bits of, 2 exact copies, 1 sort of just niche next step up from what already exists, and then something a little bit more unique by way of the Helm of Hindsight, right? Then for the cards, so we'll start off with the Majestics. We have Cutting Retort, a nice 0/4 attack that offers us some flexible token aura disruption. So that is definitely nice, right? Because in base, essentially, it's an on-rate attack, so it's great. A 0/4, blocks for 3, and then again, you can flexibly destroy a number of auras, right? So up to 3, you may destroy that many token auras with different names. So that is the one drawback from the card, but again, it shouldn't be, necessarily super strong. I would like the design space to eventually give us something that's, a bit more like stack disruption. So, getting rid of the entirety of Fang's fealty, a whole stack of rune chant, etc. But this definitely does enough, right? Again, it's a non-rate attack that chips down 1 fealty from Fang, maybe turns off his ability, gets rid of a rune chant, messes with rune gate for rune blade, could even clear something like an embodiment of earth or a preemptive quicken, embodiment of lightning, right? There is definitely enough stuff that you can hit with this that definitely makes it impactful in, again, a area of the game that we don't quite have enough support just yet, although Super Slam is definitely bringing a lot of aura disruption. Then we have Overcrowded. Now this card, this is by far probably the best Majestic in the set, at least in the generic sense as well, which, is understandable. It's going to be the promo for the season, which is great because it is an absolutely fantastic card. This is a strong blue block that is not a defense reaction and gets better the more tokens your hero can create, right? So for reference, this card, in fact, you have Fealty, you probably have Vigor from Grains, right? And now you have a blue that you can arsenal as a 4 block. That is just beautiful, right? And better than that, it, doesn't get disrupted by you can't play defense reaction. So yeah, Overcrowded, albeit designed for the Codex interaction, is still a fantastic card by itself because of the versatility it offers, right? It's a blue pitchable when you need it, and then if you can get 1 token, it's a fair block, and if you're generating more than 1 token as X hero, then it's most likely going to be a really good blue block, right? So yeah, Ambush is nice to see, and this card definitely puts it to great use. So yeah, the more tokens you generate, the better this card gets. So even with all the Super Slam heroes, you can probably comfortably get it to being a blue 4 block that you can arsenal to still use it as a block, right? Which is fantastic. And again, goes back to the Fabled and the way the design is seemingly progressing, where again, we're going to have more influence on ambush and block rather than reliance on defense reactions, right? Kick the Hornet's Nest. So this is a yellow variation to Nasty Surprise, but I like this significantly more, even though it doesn't come with the agility. So Nasty Surprise from Heavy Hitters creates agility, might, and vigor. Kick the Hornet's Nest from Super Slam creates confidence, might, toughness, and vigor, right? So some overlap there, but instead of agility, you get toughness and confidence. Now, this has to be destroyed by your opponent, and that's where the card really relies on everything else going on, right? Because Nasty Surprise being a blue pitchable, sure, that's good in certain scenarios, but then when it becomes, one of the last cards in your deck, you're really hoping your opponent destroys it, and if they don't, you're left with a not-so-great attack, right? Versus Kick the Hornet's Nest, where, at least in Brute, it is another yellow 6, which is something you definitely want to hit. So the fact that it has different options, other than, trying to trigger its effect, makes, to me, Kick the Hornet's Nest the better card, right? Because overall, the stat line is more useful, right? But it is still, a card that requires your opponent to interact with it, which takes away some of the agency in your deck, right? Okay, Unwavering Resolve. Now this is an interesting one. I feel like this is designed primarily for the limited experience, right? Which gives me hope that super rares are fairly abundant, right? But it is in the same vein as like Last Ditch Effort. So if you control no cards in your deck, this gets +4, and then if this is defended by 3 or more cards, it gets go again. So the scenario there is what, right? No cards, you present a 10, your opponent blocks it out, and you still keep going. And maybe that clutches you the game, so, your hand is something like 1 Unwavering Resolve, 3 Last Ditch Efforts, and you go Last Ditch, Unwavering, probably, because you don't want to bank on the go again, right? But still, it is the potential to present a lot of above rate damage if you've decked out, right? There is some level of use to that in certain types. Now, Last Ditch Effort, gets there a bit easier because it's, you know, a blue, so you can pitch it, you can cycle it away until it is one of the last cards in your deck. So yeah, I would definitely put this on more side of limited, but obviously it's not like the other limited cards where it's directly against Guardian, directly against Brute, but it does have the trademark 2 block on it, right? Right, now, beat the same drum. If you've controlled an agility token, create an agility token. Then repeat for confidence, might, toughness, and vigor. So it hits all the tokens, all 5 of them, right? And it counts any token that has already popped. Because it's if you've controlled this turn, right? So if you've had agility at the start of your turn and it's resolved, you've still had it this turn, and therefore beat the drum allows you to continue to make tokens. So it's not a scenario of you have to create tokens on your turn to then use beat the same drum to duplicate those tokens. No, it is essentially an extender to what you've accomplished on your previous turn, which when it comes to something like agility is definitely really, really useful, because if you're a deck that's, you know, getting an agility token every other turn, right, then sometimes this will line up, other times it will just be a nice blue 3-block. So it is what we want in a utility card where, again, it has that fallback of blue, blockable, right? Or it's functional in the right scenario, and the scenario isn't too hard to accomplish, right? And then the fact that you can get multiple tokens out of it as well, because just getting agility is good, right? Getting agility plus a might, plus a confidence, plus a vigor, with probably agility, might, agility, vigor being the go-to with what Brute's aiming to do, meaning it's, you know, it's above rate, right? Because a blue on turn amp is worth +1. That +1 kind of equates to Guardian, kind of equates to resource, toughness, etc. So yeah, it is definitely a really nice utility card. Time flies when you're having fun. The next time an attack action card hits a hero this turn, you may destroy an aura they control. Any aura doesn't have to be a token. And then if this was played from Arsenal, the next attack action card you play this turn gets +3. So it's very similar to a couple of other cards we've seen, Plunder Run and Smashing Good Time. Plunder Run allows you to draw a card if an attack action card has hit this turn, and then Smashing Good Time allows you to destroy an item with cost 2 or less the first time you hit, right? So they all have that same wording. The first time an attack action card hits a hero this turn, you get to do X, and they all offer the same buff if they are played from Arsenal. So I think because of where auras are in the game and the fact that, again, this can destroy any aura, this is better than both, well, maybe not Plunder Run, because Plunder Run, well, there's a reason it's banned in certain formats, right? But Aura Disruption is definitely something that we need, so I think that alone is a strong effect, which can then be on top of the +3. So unlike, for instance, the Unwavering Resolve, this merits the other 2-block value as what this can offer as a buff, especially since its effect is ongoing for your whole turn, right? So the next time an attack action card hits this turn, instead of just the next action card you play, right? So yeah, really strong effect, really needed. And again, we're seeing a whole bunch of aura generation, so it makes sense that this set also comes with a whole bunch of aura disruption, right? Then we have Bluster Bluff, a 1 cost 6 sort of, right? So it has, when it stacks, it gets -1 unless you pay 1. So it is effectively a 2 for 6 or a 1 for 5, which is still on rate, right? But what makes this card uniquely good in that sense is that it is a on rate cheap popper, right? It's a 1 for 5, but if you block with it, it's a 6, which is definitely really nice because that fills out a need in that toolkit for, you know, wide decks to have something to play against Phantasm, mainly Prism. So it's definitely a really nice card, something that we really want to see in the rare slot, right? That advances the toolkit across play, right? Not just within the set, yeah? So Bluster Bluff is definitely a really, really nice card. And I dig the art, right? Who doesn't like a big, you still call them a bearded lizard, right? If it's the frills onto the side. But yeah, gorgeous artwork and definitely something useful and effective. But when we jump up a cost, so we have Chest Puff, now a 2 cost, effectively a 6, right? Unless you pay 1, and then it is a 3/7. So again, it's still on rates, but we're at the point now where if you're running 2 cost attacks, you probably have poppers anyway. So you don't need this, it's not necessary, but it is still on rate, so it still exists in some form of good usefulness, right? But, you know, again, it's not often the other scenario where you want something like this to spend that extra resource, right? Because if you're going to, you know, occasionally have 3 resources to spend on attack, you're going to take a better 3 cost attack. And then again, for the 2 cost perspective, you already have 6s and above anyway. So yeah, Chest Buff, it's absolutely fine, but, you know, it's not as great or as needed as Bluster Bluff. Then we have Look Tough, to round it out, I guess, right? So a 3 for 8, but effectively a 7. So a 3 for 7 or a 4 for 8. So again, stat line, it's still on rate, but, you know, the level of use, well, you know, the utility it provides, there's not really much there. Again, you have other similar cost cards that do better things, right? But LSS likes their 3s, and it means we get Bluster Bluff, which is probably the best out of them, right? Yeah. Then we have Punch Above Your Race, which does come in all color variants, but it's very interesting because each color variant isn't dropping down in power, instead it's dropping down in the amount it gets buffed. So when this attacks, you may pay 3 resources. If you do, this gets +5, +4 for yellow, +3 for blue, right? Which is definitely relevant for instance, Rathe and KO, who definitely like, these low power attacks that can get these big amps, right? So it makes sense that that's the dwindling amount, because if for instance, if the blue was even just a 0, that then you pump to 5, in either of them, definitely seems nice, because you can just, double pump it with KO's ability, put it as a base 6, that now makes it 11, and then Rathe himself, again, the half doesn't matter at that point. So, makes sense. These cards are definitely useful for those heroes, but again, to me, they sort of fill the same sort of niche use as the other -1 cards that we just went through, right? Where you'd rather just have your 3-cost attack, than have this as a potential 7, especially with the fact that, again, has that 2 block, the more limited-esque stat line, right? So right behind you, when this defends together with another card from hand, this gets +1 block, and you may look at the top card of your deck, you may put it on the bottom. Now, curiously, why didn't they just put Opt, right? When this defends together with another card from hand, this gets +1 and Opt 1. Is that why? Maybe that's not how Opt would normally resolve, but yeah, so essentially, you double block with this with a card specifically from hand, so you can't be a card from Arsenal, can't be an equipment piece, and you get to opt your deck, which definitely is nice because it's, a big attack, right? So something you can stick in Brute, still use defensively, and maybe try and line something up for Tough Nut, right? So yeah, it's utility where you need utility. It's fair stats in that sense, but you do have to double block, right? Does that make up for the opt? In a sense, I feel, right? So right behind you, it's a fun card, right? We're at the tail end of the section anyway, so these are where the cards are. If we get anything good, like Bluster Bluff, then we're super happy because, this section of cards doesn't necessarily have to be good, they just have to be fair or limited focused, right? Alright, Prime the Crowd. So a 2-cost buff, that is the next attack action card you play this turn, gets +4, and then the crowd cheers each revered hero, and the crowd boos each reviled hero. So if you're in any sense of a mirror match for Super Sam in terms of the whole hero pool, you each get your proc, right? But if you're against someone who doesn't care for a cheer or a boo, then it's just helping you, right? Which is definitely nice. So a 2 for 4 is below stats, so it's how much value you put into the cheer or boo. And I think they're definitely worth more than necessarily 1, right? Because you get the token generation off of X hero abilities, so confidence for Pleiades, toughness for Tough Nut, might for Rathe, and then vigor for KO. But then you also have the ability to turn on those other cards, right? All those other cards that look for if you've been cheered or booed this turn. So yeah, it's definitely a nice utility buff. We'll have to sort of see when it comes to deck construction once everything's finalized, if something like this is, useful enough, right, in offering that extra cheer or boo to make the deck more consistent, because it's only Rathe and Tough Nut, right, who can cheer or boo themselves through their ability. Both KO and Pleiades need cards like this to proc, right? And then lastly, we have some reprints in the expansion slot. So as a legendary, we have Warmongers Diplomacy. Definitely a very desired reprint. Very useful card, even if it only sees play against certain decks. So starting with each hero to your left, each hero chooses War or Peace. And essentially, if you choose War, you may only attack during your next turn. And then if you choose Peace, you may only play non-attacks, right? I think that's a clear-cut way to explain its text, yeah? So it can turn off certain decks that, again, go back and forth between attacking and setting up stuff, right? Runeblade, for instance. But then you do have other decks where it's probably a little bit less beneficial, like Ninja, where it's just kind of a foot all on the gas, right? So they're just going to pick War anyway and not really have their turn impeded. But it is definitely something we need. So it's nice to see it as a reprint. And it does come in non-foil and cold foil, right? Which is definitely super interesting. And then lastly, we have Snag as just a non-foil reprint, right? So no Rainbow Foil because it was featured in Crew and it is still the same artwork, but Snag is definitely a relevant card to everything else we're seeing in Super Slam. So nice blue, 0-cost instant. Attack action cards can't gain power from their own effects or the effects of attack reaction cards this turn. This includes power that was gained from effects before Snag resolves. So there's a whole bunch of new cards in Super Slam that do buff themselves, right? Get some level of power gain from their own effects, be it a cheer or some other condition that you meet. So Snag does hit all those cards. And then you have just in general, the heightened sense of attack reactions that we've sort of been in, although that's primarily, because Assassinated dominated for a while. So Snag is definitely a really useful reprint and, a great card to pick up for your toolkit just to have at the back, depending on what meta shines. Definitely a nice to see reprint. But that is all the generic cards from Super Slam, again, minus the stuff primarily focused on limited. So we'll leave it there. Let me know what you think, right? What's your standout card from the generic slot? And you cannot say the Fable, right? Because I think everyone would probably pick the Fable. So, different card. But, hope you enjoyed. See you for the next one.